On a quiet spring night in Manchester, New Hampshire, a mystery unfolded that still haunts the city to this very day. It began like so many other stories of American suburbia in the late 1970s. Small apartment buildings, neighbors who knew each other by name, and children navigating the complicated years between childhood and adulthood. But on April 26, 1980, an ordinary evening turned into a nightmare that left a mother shattered and investigators baffled. 14-year-old Laureen Rahn vanished without a trace from her own home in a case that remains unsolved more than 40 years later. This is the story of Laureen, a young dreamer, a teenager caught between innocence and independence, and the night she disappeared into the shadows. Laureen was born on April 3, 1966, in Manchester, New Hampshire, a city known for its textile mills and working-class grit. But her childhood wasn't stable. When she was still an infant, her parents divorced, and her relationship with her father grew distant, nearly non-existent. Her mother, Judith, hoping for a fresh start, packed up their lives and moved south to Miami, Florida, when Laureen was only 4. For a while, it seemed like they might escape the struggles that marked the early years. But the promise of a brighter future never fully materialized. Life in Florida proved difficult, and by 1976, they returned to Manchester, moving into a modest third-floor apartment in a brick building not far from Laureen's school. By the spring of 1980, Laureen was attending junior high just a few blocks away. She was a lively girl, known for her outgoing personality and her deep love of music and dance. Friends described her as a free spirit. She would often dream aloud about leaving Manchester behind, running away to pursue stardom, perhaps in New York or Los Angeles. "I'm going to be an actress someday," she told her closest friends, her eyes glowing with conviction. Those who knew her well said she was charismatic, fun to be around, but also restless, searching for something bigger than the small city life she'd grown up in. Like many teens, she experimented with rebellion, drinking, smoking, things her mother didn't know about. She loved her mom deeply, but she also craved independence, and she had a way of keeping secrets. Judith, a single mother trying to rebuild her life, had started dating a professional tennis player. Their relationship gave her a sense of hope and companionship. On Saturday, April 26th, she planned to accompany him to an out-of-town match. Normally, Laureen went along on these weekend trips, but with spring break in full swing, she begged her mother to let her stay behind just this once. Judith hesitated. 14 was young to stay home alone overnight, but eventually, she gave in. It was, after all, only one night. She promised to return early the next morning. It was a decision that would weigh on her for the rest of her life. That day, Laureen spent her time doing chores, watching television, and chatting with friends on the phone. Family members dropped by during the afternoon to check in on her, making sure she wasn't lonely. Later, she walked to a nearby liquor store, where she sometimes helped stock shelves in exchange for drinks. When she returned, she carried a bottle of wine and a six-pack of beer. Soon after, she called 2 friends, a boy and a girl, and invited them over to hang out. With her mother gone, they had the apartment to themselves. The 3 teenagers spent hours listening to music, laughing, and sipping from the drinks Laureen had brought. It was nothing unusual, just kids pushing boundaries, testing the edge of freedom. But around 12:30 in the morning, something happened that changed the tone of the night. They heard loud voices echoing in the hallway outside the apartment. Panic set in. They feared Judith had returned home early and would discover them drinking, and worse, with a boy in the apartment. In the rush of adrenaline, the boy either chose to slip out the back door or was urged to leave by Laureen. Either way, he fled. and the door locked behind him. Moments later, the teens realized it wasn't Judith in the hallway at all. Whoever had been speaking outside disappeared, and the night fell quiet again. But the damage was done. The boy was gone, and unease settled over the apartment. About 45 minutes later, Judith and her boyfriend finally did return. From the moment they entered the building, something felt wrong. The entire hallway was pitch black. At first, they thought the power was out, but as they climbed the stairs, they realized every single light bulb had been unscrewed. The building sat in complete darkness, a strange and unsettling discovery. Was it a prank? Or something more sinister? When they reached the apartment, the front door was unlocked. Judith's boyfriend went straight to check the back door, while Judith headed to her daughter's room. From the doorway, she saw a figure under the covers, apparently sleeping. Relieved, she almost turned away, but something felt off. Her boyfriend returned moments later to report that the back door stood open. Judith stepped closer and realized the truth. The girl in Laureen's bed wasn't her daughter at all, but her female friend. Confusion turned to alarm. The friend groggily explained that she and Laureen had been together in the room until sometime after midnight, when Laureen took a blanket and pillow to sleep on the living room couch. But now, she was nowhere to be found. Her shoes and purse were still by the couch, her belongings untouched, but her jeans, plaid blouse, and light sweater were missing. There were no signs of a struggle, no broken locks, no forced entry. It was as though Laureen had simply walked out into the night and vanished. Judith's panic grew with each passing minute. She called friends and family, hoping her daughter was with them. She and her boyfriend even drove around the city in the early hours of the morning, scanning sidewalks and parks. But there was no sign of Laureen. At 4 a.m., desperate and terrified, Judith flagged down a police officer. The search for her daughter began before dawn. Investigators quickly canvassed the area, questioning neighbors, family members, and friends. They spoke with the two teenagers who had been with Laureen that night, clearing them of involvement. Dozens of interviews followed, but all anyone could say was that Laureen often talked about running away, about escaping Manchester for something bigger. For police, this became the simplest explanation. She had finally acted on her words. Yet the evidence didn't quite add up. Why would she leave without shoes, money, or identification? Why leave her purse behind? And if she had run away, why had no one seen her? Still, investigators pursued every possible lead. They spoke with employees at local shops, hoping someone remembered seeing her that night, but no one had. Then came a glimmer of hope. A bus company employee claimed he sold a ticket to a girl who resembled Laureen on the day she vanished. Another driver insisted the same girl boarded his bus and got off at Boston South Station, 50 miles away. For Judith, it was both terrifying and encouraging. Maybe Laureen had gone to the city. But weeks later, when shown a more recent photo, the driver wavered. Maybe it wasn't her after all. Without certainty, the lead collapsed. With no evidence of foul play, authorities clung to the runaway theory, telling Judith that most teens returned within a week or two once the harsh realities of the streets set in. But Judith refused to accept it. She and Laureen were close. If her daughter had left by choice, she would have called, and she would never have left her belongings behind. As the weeks turned into months, the absence grew unbearable. Then, in October, 5 months after the disappearance, Judith received a phone bill that chilled her to the bone. It included charges for 3 long-distance calls placed from hotels in Santa Ana and Santa Monica, California. Judith had no ties to California, no family or friends there. To her, the conclusion was obvious. Laureen had made the calls. One of the numbers traced back to a hotline for abused and exploited teens. When police contacted the doctor who ran it, he denied any knowledge, claiming no records of the call. But Judith's hope flickered. Maybe her daughter was still alive. Around this time, something even stranger began. Judith started receiving silent phone calls, almost always at 3:45 in the morning. They continued for years. No words, just silence on the other end. During holidays, they became more frequent, as if someone, maybe Laureen, was reaching out, letting her know she was alive. Laureen's aunt reported similar calls, including one from a girl asking to speak with her son, Michael. The girl called him Mike, just as Laureen always had. The similarities were haunting, yet nothing concrete came of it. Eventually, Judith changed her number, and the calls stopped. In 1985, an investigator from a child advocacy group revisited the case and pressed the doctor about the hotline call. This time, he admitted that runaways occasionally stayed in his home and even mentioned that one might have been from New Hampshire. His evasive answers only deepened the suspicion, but without evidence, there was little more police could do. Further digging uncovered whispers of an underground figure known as Dr. Z, who allegedly used California motels for illicit videotaping of minors. Could Laureen have fallen into his orbit? The possibility was chilling, but his identity was never confirmed. That same year, Laureen's childhood sweetheart reported receiving a mysterious phone call from a girl who identified herself as Lori. He wasn't home at the time, but his mother relayed the message, and he was convinced it had been her. Once again, the lead went nowhere. Over the years, sporadic sightings surfaced, young women resembling Laureen spotted in different states, but none were substantiated. The mystery only deepened. For Judith, the years dragged on, marked by unanswered questions and endless grief. Each call, each rumor, reopened the wound. To this day, the disappearance of Laureen Rahn remains unsolved. Her case stands as a reminder of the fragile line between safety and danger, between ordinary life and the unexplained. One moment, a young girl was home with her friends, dreaming of the future. The next, she was gone, leaving behind a purse, a pair of shoes, and a mother's unshakable hope. In January of 2008, half a world away from New Hampshire, another disappearance would stun an entirely different community. This time, it wasn't a teenager in America, but a 37-year-old mother in Taipei, Taiwan, who walked into a modern finance building with her 4-year-old daughter and never walked out again. Despite cameras covering every hallway, stairwell, and entrance, both mother and child seemed to vanish into thin air. And like Laureen's case, the mystery left investigators, residents, and family members grappling with haunting questions they could never answer. The building itself was a symbol of order and modernity. It rose 11 stories above its surroundings, a blocky, concrete structure with mirrored windows reflecting the city's neon glow. Inside, it housed financial offices, high-income professionals, and a few well-to-do families. It was not the kind of place where chaos lived. Yet on the morning of January 21st, when a security guard began his shift, something unusual caught his eye. Inside one of the elevators lay a neatly arranged pile of clothing, a red jacket, a smaller pink one, and 2 pairs of shoes, both lined up carefully side by side. It was winter, cold enough that no one would walk out barefoot, especially not a child. The sight made his stomach twist. Curiosity and concern drove him to the security office, where he combed through the building's 13 surveillance feeds. What he saw unsettled him even more. The night before, just before 9 p.m., A woman carrying a young girl entered the lobby and stepped into the elevator. Later identified as Liu, she appeared tense, hurried, but also strangely detached. As the doors closed, she removed her own coat, then stripped the pink jacket off her daughter. Next came the shoes, both hers and the child's, set deliberately on the elevator floor. Then she stood staring at the elevator's panel, eyes locked on the glowing numbers as if hypnotized. The child remained silent, calm, her face unreadable. When the elevator doors opened on the 11th floor, Liu scooped her daughter back into her arms, turned left into a hallway, and disappeared into a stairwell. And that was the last moment anyone ever saw them. Police were called immediately. They examined the footage over and over, searching for a clue, a shadow, a misstep in the camera angles. But there was nothing. No footage of them leaving the stairwell, no sign of them exiting the building, no movement on other floors. In a building designed to prevent such mysteries, with one monitored entrance, keycard-controlled elevators, and cameras on every level, a woman and her child had seemingly evaporated. Officers launched a massive search. They checked every unit on the 11th floor, a Buddhist temple, an office space, 2 vacant apartments. They scoured stairwells, rooftops, and basements. Maintenance shafts were opened, ventilation ducts examined, even ceiling panels pulled down in desperation. Nothing. Outside, Liu's motorcycle sat untouched in the parking lot. No one in the neighborhood recalled seeing her after she entered the building. Witnesses provided little help. A teenage girl remembered seeing Liu in the lobby that evening, walking briskly toward the elevator, but their paths never crossed. She didn't seem distressed, didn't ask for help, didn't even glance sideways. That single brief sighting matched the footage, but added no new information. To investigators, it was maddening. A case with perfect video evidence of the beginning, but none of the end. So they turned their attention to Liu herself. Born in rural Taiwan, Liu had grown up with beauty that drew admirers from an early age. But in her conservative community, choices weren't hers to make. Her mother arranged a marriage to a wealthy landowner, a man who appeared on paper to offer comfort and stability. Reality was harsher. He drank heavily, lashed out in anger, and created a home that felt more like a battlefield. After bearing 3 children, Liu reached her breaking point and filed for divorce. In her community, where divorce carried stigma and shame, this act was bold, even scandalous. But Liu chose survival over appearances. For a while, she found peace as a single mother. But her husband, insisting he had changed, begged for another chance. He promised sobriety, promising to be a better man. Against her better judgment, Liu agreed, and they remarried. Soon after, she gave birth to their 4th child, another daughter. But old patterns returned. By 2008, Liu was practically raising all 4 children alone, while her husband drowned himself in bars, racking up debts the family could not pay. Friends noticed the toll it took on her. In the weeks leading up to her disappearance, she seemed unsteady, exhausted, moody, unpredictable. She wasn't sleeping, and her emotions shifted erratically. On the night she vanished, she and her husband argued bitterly once again about his drinking. Later, she told her mother and eldest daughter she planned to stay with a friend for a few days. She didn't say who, didn't take her phone, wallet, or identification. She only carried her youngest child in her arms when she walked out the door. Hours later, she stepped into that finance building, never to be seen again. Speculation swirled immediately. Some suggested she had suffered a breakdown, perhaps intending to shed her identity by leaving her belongings behind. Others whispered darker theories, that she had carried her daughter to the roof to end their lives. But searches of the rooftop and surrounding streets turned up nothing, and the building's camera system left no room for blind spots. Another theory proposed a secret lover, someone in the building she had gone to meet, but residents denied knowing her, and the longtime security guard swore he had never seen her before that night. Friends doubted the lover theory too, pointing out that Liu rarely left her home except for errands. She had no time, no opportunity for such a secret. That left the most chilling explanation. Something had happened to Liu and her daughter inside the building. Perhaps they encountered someone in the stairwell, someone who silenced them quickly and hid them in a place yet undiscovered. Yet once again, the cameras betrayed no hint of such an encounter. No one entered or left the stairwell after them. It was as if the walls of the building had swallowed them whole. The case drew nationwide attention. Newspapers called it the Vanishing Mother, a story that spread through Taiwan like wildfire. People speculated endlessly, some blaming supernatural forces, others pointing to human trafficking or organized crime. But nothing fit perfectly. 5 years later, in 2013, police reopened the case, hoping new technology might reveal what earlier searches had missed. They combed the finance building from top to bottom, questioned tenants who had moved in after the disappearance, and scrutinized the old surveillance footage once more. But the result was the same. No evidence, no leads, no explanation. Today, nearly 2 decades later, the mystery lingers. All that remains is the haunting footage. Liu in the elevator, her daughter beside her, jackets and shoes placed neatly on the floor, eyes fixed on glowing numbers. Then, the doors open, and both vanish into a stairwell that leads nowhere. Like Laureen Rahn in Manchester, Liu's disappearance is more than an unsolved case. It is a wound that refuses to heal, a question that refuses to be answered. Her family is left with silence, her children with absence, and investigators with one of the most baffling mysteries ever recorded on film. When we place the disappearance of 14-year-old Laureen Rahn beside the vanishing of Liu and her young daughter in Taipei, we begin to see patterns that transcend geography, culture, and time. Both stories unfold in environments that should have offered safety, one a small New England apartment in the early 1980s, the other a secure modern financial building in the heart of Taiwan. And yet, despite the walls meant to protect them, both Laureen and Liu slipped into silence, leaving behind fragments of evidence that taunted investigators but never formed a complete picture. In Laureen's case, the clues were deeply unsettling. The hallway bulbs deliberately unscrewed, the unlocked doors, the abandoned purse and shoes, and those eerie phone calls at 3:45 in the morning. Everything hinted at intrusion, at someone watching, waiting, and then moving at just the right moment. For Liu, the evidence was visual, etched forever in grainy surveillance footage. The jackets, the shoes, the blank stare at elevator numbers, the quiet compliance of her daughter, and then the void. Two sets of mysteries, both trapped in a paradox. We have just enough detail to know something is terribly wrong, yet never enough to explain what. These cases also expose something profoundly human, the fragile line between control and chaos. For Judith, Laureen's mother, her decision to let her daughter stay home alone for one night was one she replayed endlessly. What if she had said no? What if she had returned earlier? These questions became part of her daily life, gnawing at her, until hope itself became a form of pain. For Liu's children, the unanswered question was different. Why? Why did their mother walk into a building with one child and never come back? Did she plan it? Was she lured? Or was she simply in the wrong place at the wrong time? Every possible answer cut as deeply as the absence of one. Both stories reveal how quickly lives can fracture. One moment is ordinary, teens hanging out in an apartment, a mother stepping into an elevator. The next, everything shifts. What makes these disappearances so haunting isn't just that they remain unsolved, but that they strike at the illusion of safety we all cling to. If a girl can vanish from her own home while friends are sleeping in the next room, if a woman and her child can disappear inside a monitored building under the eye of 13 cameras, then what does safe even mean? Psychologists often talk about the human brain's obsession with closure. We crave answers, even painful ones, because not knowing traps us in a loop. For Judith, the silent phone calls were both torment and lifeline. Was it her daughter reaching out, or just a cruel coincidence? For Lou's family, the footage became their prison. They could watch it again and again, but it would always end the same way, at that stairwell, with no resolution beyond. Closure never came. And so, grief remained raw, endless, and unfinished. Investigators, too, are human. They work with evidence, logic, and procedure. But in both these cases, logic failed. With Laureen, the police leaned on the runaway theory because it was simple, even though Judith knew in her bones it wasn't true. With Lou, every theory, suicide, breakdown, secret lover, abduction, collapsed under the weight of contradictory evidence. When the rational world fails, what remains is myth. And over time, both Laureen's and Lou's stories became local legends, whispered in communities, fueling speculation, inspiring urban myths, and reminding everyone of the unknowable. But perhaps the most heartbreaking common thread is the silence. Silence in the unscrewed hallways of Laureen's apartment. Silence on the other end of Judith's phone. Silence in the elevator as Lou stripped off coats and shoes. Silence in the stairwell where cameras caught nothing more. Silence is what binds these stories together, an absence louder than any sound. So what do we take away from cases like these? On the surface, they are unsolved mysteries. But beneath that, they are stories of vulnerability, of how thin the veil between normal life and tragedy can be. They are reminders that for every missing person case we hear about, there are families left behind who wake up each day to the same unanswered questions, reliving the same haunting details. For them, time doesn't move forward. It circles back, again and again, to the moment their loved one slipped away. Even now, more than 40 years after Laureen disappeared, her name remains on the missing persons registry in New Hampshire. Her friends are adults now, some with children of their own, yet her face is forever frozen at 14. For Lou's children, nearly 2 decades have passed since they lost their mother and little sister. They've grown older, but the footage remains timeless, a permanent loop of their final moments together. We tell stories like these not because they are easy to hear, but because they matter. They matter to the families who deserve answers. They matter to the communities that still wonder. And they matter to all of us because they remind us how fragile our world can be. When people vanish without explanation, it doesn't just create a crime. It creates a crack in reality itself, a wound in the collective story we all share. And so, as we close this chapter, we leave with the same questions that haunted Judith Rahn in New Hampshire and Lou's children in Taipei. Where did they go? What happened that night? And why, in a world filled with cameras, records, and investigations, do some stories remain unsolved? Maybe, someday, answers will come. Until then, all we can do is remember, reflect, and keep their stories alive, because silence is only truly final if we stop listening.